Hi, my name's Phil. I like to come out politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss some quite innovative polling by More in Common, which highlights a major way in which voting at the next election could become very unpredictable and as a result make it incredibly difficult to call the result. We could end up with a very chaotic parliament. But first, for daily news and commentary, please hit the subscribe button to stay notified. So I produced an in-depth video recently on just why our electoral system is now broken beyond repair. But the evidence just keeps coming to show how seismic the next general election could be, and the current parliament and government would do well to come up with a system of voting which matches what the public want before the public end up with a government it powerfully doesn't want by accident. At the last general election, there were multiple factors which led to Labour winning a huge majority, but on a historically small share of the vote. One of them was people voting tactically just to get rid of the Tories. It was described as a loveless win for Labour. Some of their plans were appealing, yes, but people were mostly voting Labour or voting tactically to help Labour because they were reasonably satisfied they'd form a serious government and the Tories needed to be gone. And as well as the voting public being prepared to vote tactically in significant numbers, the effort was also coordinated with sites like StopTheTories.vote from the Movement Forward, which campaigns for electoral reform, giving people the best advice on how to tactically vote against the Tories. However, new polling from More in Common shows that this will not help Labour so much next time. Now, you may be thinking of some obvious reasons for that. For example, tactical voting is voting against something, not voting for something. It's why we should have a system that lets people vote for something. It would be much more positive, more people would engage in politics. But with the Tories in the wilderness and Labour in power and the shine very much taken off, even if the next few years involve Labour telling a much more positive story than they have so far, the level of motivation to vote tactically will naturally be lower. The motivation is always to vote against the government. Like, people don't feel as strongly about voting against the opposition. But this polling from More in Common provides a new dimension. See, it's not just progressive voters who are prepared to vote tactically. In fact, the right wing generally are more pragmatic when it comes to voting. So why wouldn't they vote tactically? The answer is, up until now, it's been completely unnecessary. If you are solidly right wing, you would just vote Conservative. It would never make any sense to do otherwise. In theory, there might be times when you'd view a Lib Dem MP as being closer to you than, say, a Labour or Green MP, but the Lib Dems almost never compete with the Labour or the Greens. So tactical voting just hasn't been a thing on the right wing until now. The emergence of Reform UK has split the right-wing vote right down the middle. Although both leaders deny it, there are senior people in both the Conservative Party and Reform UK who want some sort of pact between the two in order to unite that right-wing vote again. And this polling shows that there would be the appetite to do it. More in Common conducted a sort of reverse voting intention poll. It didn't ask people who they would vote for, but who they would vote against if they voted tactically. 23% said Labour, 22% said Reform. So, as things currently stand, there is no dominant bogeyman who will marshal tactical votes against. There's as many people who would vote tactically against Reform UK, which would benefit Labour, as against Labour, which obviously would not. Interesting that 4% would prioritise voting tactically against the Lib Dems, the most inoffensive party there is. However, this is roughly the same proportion as think the earth is flat, so I probably won't dwell on that one too much. Now, I will point out one important piece of information here, which the poll does not provide, and that is how these votes are distributed. For example, if the people who would vote tactically against Reform UK are loaded up into the constituencies where Reform stand a chance of winning, particularly those key battlegrounds between Labour and Reform UK, but the ones against Labour are spread out all over the place, including in areas where there's not going to be a tight contest, then it's still advantage Labour. Polls like this, which just look at the national picture, sometimes a very broad regional breakdown at best, don't tell us that. That is the sort of detailed polling which political parties should be carrying out for their own internal use. But it does show that at the next election, there could be as many people willing to vote tactically against Labour as against Reform UK. And people shouldn't think of tactical voting as being something that just progressive voters do. Like I say, the regressive vote, if we call it that, has always been sewn up in the past. The reason there wasn't tactical voting working in favour of the Conservatives in the past was there was no need. I actually remember in the 2017 general election, I think it was the Daily Mail, one of the Tory papers tried to produce a tactical voting page. It's like, oh, to keep Corbyn out, you need to tactically vote like this. And the tactical vote was always Conservative. It was basically, oh yeah, you should just vote tactically for the Conservatives. It's like, mate, I don't think you know what tactical voting means. So there was never any need for them to vote tactically in the past. Now there is. Voters who desperately want to avoid a Labour or a Labour-led government are potentially prepared to vote tactically against it in the same numbers as are prepared to vote against a Reform government. And consider something else. Although there was a lot of tactical voting last year, powered by the tactical voting sites, there were places where tactical voting would absolutely have dumped more Tories out, where you actually didn't see very much tactical voting. But if a right-wing tactical voting campaign to emerge, that would be promoted by the national mainstream media, as well as the biggest social media political activists online, who I'm afraid to say are very right-wing. It would have money and organisation behind it, which would put the progressive efforts into the shade. Now, this is incredibly important polling. However, just to stop it being too depressing, a couple of counterpoints. So as well as not knowing how these results are spread across marginal constituencies, which are the ones that matter, there's something else as well. Although the number who would vote against Labour is roughly the same as those who would vote against Reform UK, there are a couple of things to bear in mind. First of all, Labour have deliberately front-loaded their unpopular moves early in the Parliament. Some of them have been too unpopular, but nonetheless, it is still part of their general strategy to do that. The intention is in the years leading up to the end of this Parliament to be publicising falling NHS waiting lists, more jobs being created, better workers' rights, the better paying conditions which will come from that, and of course the building projects which will be popping up all over the country. In other words, Labour stand a chance of projecting a much more positive and optimistic vision as we get close to the election. That is indeed their aim. This moment in time should actually be their lowest point. Second, 27% would vote against the left-wing combined options, Labour Greens, to 32% who would vote against the right-wing options of Conservative Reform UK. So a small but significant lead for those who would vote against the right, which in a first-past-the-post system is maybe all you need. But like I say, depends how these feelings are spread around the country. And I hope More in Common and maybe other pollsters pursue this line of thinking, because I think it would be very interesting to see how this develops over the Parliament. Because although I say that Labour should be telling a more positive story as we get close to the next election, I've been saying for a while that Reform UK face headwinds as well. The performance of the councils they now control, that will be in for some scrutiny. After a suitable period of time, no one will be able to say, oh, why haven't you fixed everything right away? But, you know, next year might be a time to look at it. The collapse of society in the USA under a MAGA government could yet become a loud enough warning this side of the pond to be noticed. Farage could come under more personal scrutiny for the policies he has, which are not even popular with his own voters. Privatising the NHS, wrecking clean energy projects, defending Putin and Trump, never turning up to key debates. Tax breaks for rich immigrants. And we know that Farage goes to pieces when someone puts him under pressure. It's all right being calm and collected when you are in control of everything. But as soon as someone asks him awkward questions, he goes off on a flap. It's also worth noting that a Reform Tory pact would be highly risky unless it was somehow covert. Although Conservative supporters hate Labour more than they hate Reform UK, nonetheless, 25% of them seem to be prepared to vote tactically against Reform UK. Compare this with Labour supporters, where only 14% would vote tactically against the Lib Dems or Greens. For the record, 12% of Reform supporters would also vote tactically against the Conservatives. So in the party support breakdown, there is some bad news for Reform UK. They compete against the Conservatives very strongly. So some sort of arrangement will be needed to unite that right-wing vote, but any obvious pact could end up costing them. This is why Badenoch and Farage desperately deny any pact. It's also why Jenrick, who is known to want some sort of deal, could lead to complete disaster for the Tories if he became their leader. I mean, let's look at a way of sort of quantifying some of this. So Labour supporters, 62% of them would vote tactically against the right to 14% against Lib Dems or Greens. So a net total of 48% of Labour voters who live in an area Labour can't win might be prepared to vote tactically against the Tory reform combo. The same exercise for the Lib Dems and Greens come up with a net 38% of Lib Dems who would vote tactically against that Tory reform combo, 29% for Green supporters. But the support for voting tactically against the progressive combo is only 24% for Conservative supporters, although it is a much more powerful 52% of Reform supporters. That suggests that the pact could actually be way more damaging for the Tories than Reform. But I would also refer people to other polling, including from More in Common, which consistently shows that Reform UK supporters are also less likely to vote tactically than supporters of other parties. Because another thing this polling doesn't reveal, not only how it's spread across the country, it's my old thing of saliency. How likely are these different supporters to vote tactically? Because the question was simply, under the right conditions, who would you vote against? We don't necessarily know how strongly each of those respondents to the poll feels that and is prepared to do it. So this poll isn't necessarily bad news for progressives. There's enough in the details which provides interesting opportunities for further research, but tactical voting at the next election will look very different to the last one. Labour should be taking this quite seriously. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments below. For more content, you could subscribe to the channel or even join for access to streams and behind the scenes updates. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.